Tao Meeting Archives, November 15th, 2015. The Tao Perspective on Terrorist Attacks by Derek Lin.
Let's go ahead and get started. If everyone can just follow me, we'll do the meeting beginning ritual. 起立，面向佛堂，参加三鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，参加各位点传是一鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。Please be seated. Okay, everybody, I just got a message from Bill. Bill is going to have to miss our meeting today, so we're going to have to proceed without him. And on top of that, Ed also sent a message yesterday saying that he'll have to miss this meeting also. That means today you will only get my perspective plus your questions. So hope that's okay with everybody. So as I mentioned, today it's going to be basically 2 hours of yours truly, just like the way it used to be in the beginning. For those who are seeing my screen, my cover page for the first time, let me briefly mention that the top half, the top is the masthead of the Facebook group, the group on Facebook where you will find a bunch of resources. Every Sunday after we're done talking, Mark, another volunteer like myself, will post some key slides and links in this group so that people can delve deeper into some of the topics that I touch on. At the bottom, you will see Tao Meeting Archives on Facebook. This is the effort of my friend Jeff, who is even now recording both the video and the audio of this meeting. And anyone that misses this meeting can always go to YouTube, type in Tao Meeting Archives, and be able to see a huge collection of recordings from the past. So an incredible accomplishment. I'm truly in awe of what's been done. Last Sunday, I mentioned to the Chinese-speaking Tao cultivators that we have more than 175 videos posted in YouTube. Everyone thought that it was unbelievable. So thank you, Jeff. Moving on. Let me, as usual, let me go over the schedule for today and the following Sundays. Today, the 15th, as you can see, chapter 46. I actually think that we may be able to get into chapter 47 of the Tao Te Ching. We'll see how it goes. Now, you can probably guess, you would probably expect that prior to coming into this meeting today, I received a ton of questions about current events, especially the attack that had just taken place. So I definitely want to address that. I have prepared the slides to talk about it from a Tao perspective. If you haven't encountered the Tao perspective before, you may find that I have some things to say in there that are not easily anticipated, that are perhaps a little bit unexpected. So that's for today. So chances are next week we will just be going into 47. We'll probably be done with 46 completely today. After that, Thanksgiving, everyone is encouraged to spend time with loved ones and family. And we're not going to have an online meeting that day. You know, hopefully you will be spending quality time with those that are close to you. Then going into December, as you can see, we actually don't have like a Christmas break as far as I know. We're just going to go through the entire month of December, going into 47, 48, 49. And that'll take us into yet another year. It's amazing how time flies. I think when I was Amy's age, a year seemed like a long time. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. So what is the Tao perspective on terrorist attacks? Here, I am not framing the question as terrorist attack in Paris, because I want to make this much more useful by framing it in a way that we can always apply to any terrorist attacks. There are certain principles that are timeless, that are universal. So no matter what it is, it could be a terrorist happening at a different time at a different place. We're going to find that the same principles from the Tao apply equally. So first, I'm going to start with this bullet here. Some westernized versions of the Tao say there is no absolute right or wrong, so one should never judge or condemn others no matter what. If you're new to the Tao, this is going to sound right. This is going to be like, yeah, I read that. I know about that. So, I should not be judgmental. So this is where I'm going to depart from the expected by saying that what actually in the authentic Tao from Asia, the Tao that we attend to study from the original source, the masters will never hesitate to assess the situation. Now remember, everybody has critical faculties. We all have this inborn ability to assess the situation all around us. We needed this ability in primitive times just to survive. Am I walking into danger? Am I in a position of safety? We needed to know that. Thus, the constant evaluation, passing judgment on safety, danger was actually critical to the evolution and survival of the human species. It's something that is natural for us, and the Tao is that which is natural. So the Tao will not ask you to suppress that which you possess naturally, which is your ability to make evaluations of everything around you. You do anyway. Even if I were to say you should never do that, you're still doing that all the time. Should I cross the street now or wait until a car has passed? Okay? You're not going to just go with the flow. I feel like going into the middle of the street today because you may be struck. So, the Tao, the natural. Never hesitate to assess the situation. Indeed, and this is the key, they insist on observing without attachment. So the reason why judgment, especially harsh critical judgment, can get us in trouble is because oftentimes they're made with attachments, meaning preconceptions, hang-ups, or personal prejudice that perhaps we're not even aware of. So when you make decisions, when you make observations and decisions with attachment, they are going to be skewed. They're going to be biased. They won't produce great results. So for that reason, the sages will insist on making observations without attachments. Observations, evaluations by themselves are not bad things. But if we don't do them properly, they could become bad things. I hope that makes sense. So, and the reason why they insist is because they want to make the best and clearest decisions possible. So why are the sages wise? Because they're able to reach decisions of wisdom. They're able to reach decisions of wisdom because they look at the situation without attachments. So they don't just see the surface manifestations, they also see the inner essence. They see through it to understand it completely, then they can advise you as to the best course of action. The best course of action is the best path to take. The best path to take in life, that's the Tao. The Tao just means the path. That's all it means. So, how do they make this assessment? How do they make it free from attachments as much as humanly possible? Well, the assessment can range from positive to negative. This is actually a little bit more subtle that I want to point out for everyone. It means that the assessment is not good or bad. Good or bad is a two-stage proposition. It's kind of cut and dry. Is it good? Is it bad? Well, we need at least 3 states. It's good, it's bad, it's neutral. Preferably, we need to do it like the sages do, which is to recognize the full spectrum of possibilities. like mostly good, some bad to be aware of, or some good and some bad. It's a mixture of the two. Occasionally there's going to be something that's so horrendously bad, that even if a little bit of good comes out of it, it is still something to be avoided, etc. So that's just reality. That is not framing the Tao in a way in the realm of philosophy where, from an abstract sense, there is no absolute good or bad. It is in the human sense where certain things could be good or bad from the human perspective. The reason why it's always framed in the human perspective in terms of benefit and welfare for humanity is because we're part of humanity. We're members of this thing called humanity. We have to look out for ourselves. Certainly nobody else will. So the positive and negative, the full spectrum of that, the gray scales, the graduated scales, the gradual shading of good and bad, it's all in terms of what is good, what is bad for humanity as a whole. So when I talk about humanity, I also want to make sure everyone understands the different levels that we can perceive a situation, again, from the Tao perspective. So from this slide, I hope that you will take away something that's pretty important. From the Tao perspective, we would not say, oh, there's no good and bad about the terrorist attacks. We should never say that. In some westernized versions of the Tao, people will say that. Well, they don't really understand the authentic Tao from Asia, where the masters will say, what's great about it? What's so good about it? There's widespread suffering. There's people who got hurt. There's people who lost loved ones. There's people who perhaps haven't died but have lost limbs. They have to go through the rest of their lives, being disabled in that way. So what's so great about it? We need to be able to evaluate from a practical, pragmatic perspective and not fall back to the philosophical sense, such as sometimes is the tendency of academia. Okay, so that's slide one. Remember, there is a good, there is a bad. In fact, it's not just a good or a bad, it's a full spectrum of possibilities, but it is there. And evaluation is possible. It may not be a perfect evaluation, may not be a perfect assessment, but the point is you can make some sort of conclusion out of it. You can reach some kind of decision points out of it. Now let's talk about the different levels and how they affect the way we see it. The different levels of perception. Let me explain what they are first and how they apply to the terrorist attack. Number one, individual level of perception, the focus is on personal survival, especially important if you happen to be under attack at a particular instant. So when I talk about survival, I am referring to fight or flight. I am referring to just a, what in the modern vernacular is quote unquote real. This thing just got real. Of course, people don't say thing. This just got real, and you have to make a real decision that could impact your own life or death. That's the individual level. It's about your survival. Now, there is also the group level. That's beyond just the individual. So this is in terms of groups of people, which could be nations, it could be ethnicities, it could be religions. So when we see something like, ethnic cleansing in Eastern Europe, that is, the dividing line is drawn not in terms of national boundaries, but in terms of ethnicities, ethnic groups. Religions, well, we definitely see that grouping as well. And keep in mind too that within the overall divisions of religions, there are subdivisions, just as there are many sects of Christianity, many different divisions. The overall Christianity, Catholicism divides into so many different varieties. It is actually the same with all other major branches of religions in the world. So many different variations. But the point here is that people can be grouped with a particular identity, and that's a level to think about a situation too. Before I go any further, let me say that most people will be stuck at this level, at level 2. And let me explain why that is in just a moment. Worldwide level is when you transcend beyond the boundaries of nations, of your own group, your own tribe, and extend your consciousness and your awareness to cover all of humanity, regardless of those groupings, regardless of national origin, ethnicities, and religions. Human beings are human beings. There are commonalities for all of us. There are things that we all share. There's a core. There's a core of humanity that we all take part. So I call it the worldwide level. If you like, you can call it the global level. I think global here is a little bit, this may be the humanity level is what I'm trying to say. If I say global or worldwide, there's a tendency to also think, well, I'm also including the animal kingdom, the plants, the biosphere of this world. Actually, at level 3, I'm just thinking about the billions of human beings on this planet. When you think beyond the human level, you begin to get into the universal level, and that is like all possible life, all life elsewhere. This level 4 is where some philosophers tend to be stuck at. So let me explain. You can see group level very easily, especially as a response to the attacks, when you tune in to certain channels or certain internet websites and see a lot of anger-filled, hate-filled expressions about us versus them. They did this to us. We have to strike back. We have to hurt them back so much worse than they have hurt us, so that they will never dare to do it again. That is the tribal mentality, and it tends to be very black and white, so you're either with us or against us. That's the group level. We will find, invariably, every time something like this happens, we're going to find majority of the people stuck at that level, circle the wagon, it's us against them, this means war, etc. So, ironically, we just got done going over chapter 46, which is about the miseries of war, miseries of warfare, and how it is the worst possible thing that human beings can choose. Last time, I even posed a puzzle for everyone. I said, in some ways, war is worse than hell. Can you think of a way that war is worse than hell? And people came up with some very interesting responses. And what I offered last time was that if you think about how the conventional concept of hell, it's the sinners that go to hell, so you can look at it from that perspective and say, well, they sinned, so the consequence is that they go to hell, there's a cause and effect. In war, pretty much any war, in warfare, the vast majority of the people that are hurt are the innocent civilians. So there's no equivalence between the two. You're a sinner in one scenario, the conventional hellbound scenario, and you are an innocent civilian caught in the crossfire in the other scenario. So in that respect, war is actually worse than hell. And there are many other respects that you can think about. I'll just use that as one example. So we're talking about war being miserable, war being hell or worse than hell. But that's the level 2, tribal mentality. It tends to be inclined toward violence as a response, hatred as a response. So it's a wrapper around a whole lot of fear for extinction, fear for further damage, etc. Acting out of that fear, you end up with hatred, and out of that hatred, you end up with violence and aggression. So many people will be stuck in level 2. Now, I mentioned that a few people will be stuck in level 4, the philosophers or the armchair philosophers. So they will say that there's no right or wrong, that there's no absolute good or bad, there's no such thing as absolute good or evil in nature, and therefore it is all this invention of humanity that causes those distinctions. The attackers, they are right in their own way, when you view the world from the prism of their experience, of their perspective, you'll see that they are doing the only right thing that they know, etc., etc. That is level 4. So philosophers are stuck in that level, but let me also say this. It is not useful or helpful in any way at the present time. It leads to indecision and confusion because there's no clarity on what needs to be done. Well, we think that we're right, but they think that they're right. Who's to say who is ultimately right or wrong in an absolute sense? So that is not very helpful. So I want to challenge everyone to think about this a little bit and put yourself on the right level. And I want to offer level 3 as the appropriate level between the two. Level 3 is in view of all of humanity, and therefore it's not us versus them, this group versus that group, this tribe versus that tribe, and it is also not extending beyond human beings to humanity. So let me give you some examples. It is indeed possible that these attacks back and forth among human beings is a good thing for cockroaches. Why? Because if human beings succeed in wiping ourselves out, but the cockroaches survive, then they are the life form that inherit the earth. Now, that's a perspective that's beyond humanity, beyond level 3. It gets into, hey, no, I'm looking at it from a wider perspective. I'm looking at it from the cockroach perspective or some other life form perspective. Whatever other life form will inherit the earth after humanity. How useful is that? We're not part of that other species. We're part of this species. We're interested in our own survival. Now, by the same token, I can say, well, think about all the possible life forms in the universe. You know, suppose we wipe ourselves out and the aliens, the carbon-based aliens who are similar to us in some ways and can be compatible with our biology, they would like for us to wipe ourselves out, and that way they can come into the earth and utilize the earth's resources without resistance. It can be a very good thing for them that we're engaged in this battle among ourselves. But again, that is not a useful perspective for human beings. It may be good for extraterrestrials who want our resources. That's a universal perspective. I don't really care about that because I'm not an alien. So I hope that you will be with me as we consider this entire problem, not just from the perspective of this nation, not even from the perspective of Western civilization, but from the perspective of all human beings on this planet. That is the perspective associated with the Tao. Now let's dig a little bit deeper. You'll begin to see what I mean and what I needed to get everyone to see the appropriate level. So the attacks were horrifying. There can be no question about that. So how should we respond? Before we answer that question about our response, in the Tao, you always want to understand what is the spectrum. What are the extremes? And what's in the middle? What is the point of equilibrium between the extremes? And the easiest way is to try to figure out what the extremes are first. So one end of the spectrum can be pacifism. That's turning the other cheek. You know, you've struck me on one cheek, now I offer up my other cheek for you to strike. Now, that is something that we have all learned, you know, perhaps when we were young, perhaps in Sunday school, you know, to take even more punishment, basically, is what is taught. Often taught in the Western world, but let me ask everyone, how often is it actually followed? You know, in reality, I would say that virtually no one would advocate that, pacifism. And, you know, in this particular context, I don't really hear anyone saying that we should go to that extreme. Oh, now that the attack has occurred, we should do nothing, even if it happens again. We should invite more dangerous elements, you know, and risk this happening again, turning the other cheek. So that's one extreme. In the Tao, it's never the extreme that gives you your best possible option. So I'm presenting this in red, hopefully to make it a cue that this would not be congruent with the Tao. What is the other extreme? Well, aggression, violence, hatred. Target the group behind the attack. So I'm being deliberate in making that a generic statement because this could apply to other scenarios, other attacks as well. Strike back, inflict damage and pain, wipe them out, nuke them until they glow. So that is the very other extreme end of it. So in a moment, I'll talk about why that's not congruent with the Tao, but if you've been following the Tao Te Ching lectures, you should know that multiple chapters are devoted to this topic, and multiple reasons, many reasons are cited to explain why that's not a good idea. So, question, out of these two extremes, what's in the middle? What's the appropriate point of moderation between pacifism and violence? Somewhere between the two is an answer that is in alignment with the Tao. That would be the true Tao perspective on terrorist attacks. So I'm approaching, we're getting warmer. And let me stay on this slide for just another moment. Let me point everyone, well, let me go from the back here. Nuke them until they glow. How realistic is that? How realistic is it that tactical nuclear weapons will actually be deployed? Okay, no, not realistic. It's probably not going to happen. Western nations will not be the first to do that. That's probably something you can take to the bank. That's number one. Number two, wipe them out. How realistic is that? You know, has any group of people ever been wiped out? Any group of human beings ever been wiped out completely? That there's nobody left to exact some sort of vengeance? Okay, so wiping a group of people out, we're talking genocide here. Okay, again, not a realistic option. It's the kind of violence that begets more violence. You think that you have wiped someone out, but then, you know, friends, relatives, you know, someone survives, rallies, and strikes back, causing yet another horrific round of damages, which will then lead to even more vengeance, except on this end. And, you know, if you think about the action movies, the science fiction movies that we have seen, how many movies out there follow that exact theme? You know, vengeance. It's something that human beings really seem to respond to. But it's a never-ending cycle. Okay, now, let's zero in on the point between the two. Remember, it has to be between pacifism and violence. First, let me talk about why violence cannot be the answer. So aside from the fact, the impractical, impossible nature of trying to wipe someone out, here's the other reason. What is the intent behind the attack? Well, we know what they are. It's the same as any guerrilla warfare, any attack of that nature. They're intended to terrorize, yes, intimidate, yes, and disrupt, yes, and therefore provoke rage and more violence, like a violent response. And that in turn becomes an effective recruitment tool. So let me throw some statistics out there. Last year, 2014, roughly 800 French citizens, these are mostly immigrants from the Middle East, young men who come from immigrant families from the Middle East. Roughly 800 of them last year traveled to the Middle East to join ISIS, to fight for ISIS, with ISIS. This year, 2015, that number has doubled. So the more you go into rage and the more you go into a killing spree, the more you advertise for their recruitment posters. Okay? So As we decide on a range of options, you need to keep that in mind, that you are not feeding into them, making the attackers even stronger. In a moment, I'll give you a metaphor that will make this easier to understand. You don't have to be a geopolitician to figure this out. It's a principle that applies from the largest stage of the world to the smallest. But let me outline a couple of the main points in the equilibrium between pacifism and violence. Point one, self-defense. No surrender, no giving in, no tolerance for further attacks. Maintain vigilance, guard vulnerabilities, protect civilians, deploy preventive measures, all of which are easier to say than to do. But this is what is necessary. This is what has to be done, no matter what. Okay? So that's one point. The Tao is not pacifistic. The Tao is about peace, but not about pacifism. It's not about accepting your fate, quote unquote, and be killed by the enemy, quote unquote. Remember, some of the most devastating warriors from Chinese history have been very dedicated Taoists. They are competent in the craft of warfare, but they regret the necessity of having to use it. And they avoid having to exercise military might whenever possible. But they will never shy away from defending themselves, defending civilization, and defending the weak who cannot protect themselves. So defense, that's number one. Number two, the other response is empathy. Support the victims, seek ways to help those in need, heal the injured, comfort those who have suffered losses in more ways than one, sometimes very great losses. Now, let me present to you the metaphor, and then we'll go to the next slide. The metaphor first. Here's a situation that many of us have witnessed or experienced directly. Imagine little kids, perhaps yourself as a little kid, in the schoolyard, and there is a bully. Isn't there always a bully? Pretty much in every schoolyard, every collection of kids, there's a bully. Now imagine the bully picking on someone that is weak and vulnerable and pushing him, just pushing, come on, you want to fight? Come on, So what happens? The bully is hoping to provoke an angry reaction from the weaker kid, and when the weaker kid lashes out in an attack, the bully gets to strike back and pummel the kid. Now, this is not to say that Western civilization is the weaker kid. I'm using it as a metaphor here. Let me talk about even when imagine that the little kid is in fact has been trained since a very young age by his father to be deadly with martial arts, but also at the same time has been instructed by his father to never use those deadly arts unless in absolute need. So for the child, despite having the ability to seriously hurt the bully, is not reacting. So a bad response, okay? Given the spectrum that we're looking at, one bad response is for the kid that's being bullied to accept more punishment from the bully. That's not a good idea. You have to stand up to the bully. At the same time, it is also not a great idea to launch into an attack against the bully. So what is the ideal? The ideal is that the kid will defend himself, and also the point about empathy, what does that mean? It means what we're seeing today in the world, in which is the nations of the world stand with Paris, stand with France. So if you think about the schoolyard example, what happens if all the kids in the schoolyard, instead of being spectators, as a lot of times we have seen, what if these kids all know what to do, all understand the Tao, and they all band together around the kid that is being bullied, to stand with the kid that is being bullied against the bully himself and say, this is not acceptable. We support him. We are against you. Now, the bully realizes that he's not going to achieve the intended effect of his provoking attacks and backs down. That is the ideal situation. Now, the problem in the world today, the problem of extremism runs far deeper than the simplistic example that I'm providing. So I'm not pretending that there's an easy answer, there's an easy solution. But we need to start with these 2 points as a response. You know, we need to deliver plenty of support, and we need to make sure that we firm up on the defense. Now, when I say empathy, I want to be very clear. There's one thing that I don't mean, which is what a lot of people do. People see empathy, people see support, and they'll say, yeah, I am sending my prayers to the victims. Now, that's my next slide. Prayer is also not the best answer. Why not? This is going to come as a surprise to some people because they imagine that as I talk about Tao, I am talking about sort of a religious sense, and therefore, should I not be, you know, approving of prayers? How come I say it's not the best answer? Well, let's run down the bullets. First, it may not be what our friends need or want. Take a look at this cartoon that I see over here. Some people think that this came from Charlie Hebdo, but it's actually from a different Parisian source, as far as I can determine. But this is the cartoon. Friends from the whole world, thank you for Pray for Paris. Hashtag Pray for Paris. But we don't need more religion. Okay? I can understand why they say that, because you can draw a connection between religion and the attacks that took place. Obviously, it's obvious. Our faith, that faith is not directed to some sort of deity. Our faith goes to music, kisses, life, champagne, and joy. Hashtag Paris is about life. Okay? So prayers have become a cliche, everybody. Look at how many people say that. Oh, I'm praying for the victims. I'm praying for the family of the victims. Now, I'm also going to be a little bit harsh. I apologize if this is offending and surprising to people. There's no compelling evidence that prayers do anything other than to make the person that's praying feel better. Sorry, there's no compelling evidence. Those of you that know my background, you may understand where I'm coming from with that. You know, my college education was concentrated in the sciences. I went to Harvey Mudd College, and some of you guys know where that is or what that is. Harvey Mudd, out in Claremont, California, I went there for 1 year back in 1983 before my family moved back to Canada. So I was admitted to Harvey Mudd College because it's a very elite institution. They accept only from the top few percentage of college-bound students. So everybody has stratospheric SAT scores. Another elite college in the area is Pomona. So they presented their SAT averages, score averages, and they were much lower than the average in Harvey Mudd College by a very long stretch. So basically, Harvey Mudd exists as a place because the best and brightest in the country will generally apply to MIT, Caltech, or UC Berkeley. Those places are very difficult to get into if you want like an engineering or electronics degree, and those that are not accepted by those places end up in Harvard Mudd. So I end up in Harvard Mudd also. I actually did not apply to those other places because nobody in my family has any background, has any knowledge about the college admission process. So by the time me, as a high school senior, realized that, hey, I should be applying to college, the deadline had already passed for both Caltech and MIT. So, and you know, Harvard Mudd College was close to home in Claremont, so that became my logical choice. But when I went in there, I realized that like everybody is a super genius, and I wasn't quite at their level. Now, I wasn't normal either, so I could fit in, but there were so many super geniuses there, it's unreal. It's like a different world. So one time, we all attended these different classes to build the core curriculum. One of the classes was psychology. So our professor, we have some of these remarkable, phenomenal professors who are the tops in their fields as well. This particular professor, he was interesting. His last name was Seven, not the number 7, but 7 spelled out, S-E-V-E-N. So you may know someone who's got that unusual last name, but his surname literally was 7. That's what he was born with. So Professor 7 addressed the entire class. He talked about some of the research that had gone on about extrasensory perception, about the power of the mind to influence reality. He spoke of the fact that they were inconclusive. He asked all of us, the freshman class, to go into this exercise where we would be deep in trance and we would visualize certain things, okay, to see if some of these visualizations would come to pass, would become reality. And what Dr. Seven said was that, you know, you guys have to realize if this ability is correlated with intelligence, you guys have such an incredible edge because you come from, you know, the top few percentages of all the students. Now, he was, of course, optimistic. What we visualized never came to pass. So one thing at least we know for sure is that it's not, you know, it doesn't correlate with intelligence. And in fact, later research shows repeatedly that while there is an effect that can show up with what they call meta-analysis, there's no compelling evidence to suggest that prayers will do anything at all. I'm going to boil it down and simplify it and say that, yeah, prayers will make you feel great. That's good. It'll concentrate your mind. That's great too. It won't affect entities that are away from you in a meaningful way. But if you think meaningful words and meaningful deeds instead, you could actually begin to have an impact. You could actually start to make a difference. Meaningful words, what I mean by that is expressions of solidarity, expressions of support, you know, like standing with the kid that is being bullied and say, this is not right. I won't stand for that. To state where you stand, that to me is meaningful. That to me would accomplish more than praying for the victims. And deeds, whatever actions we can take, that is the building blocks of life. And Paris is about life. Being about life is the Tao. Having faith in the Tao is to have faith in life. So that's the Tao perspective on the terrorist attacks. By tangential issues, I mean false equivalence. In discussions about this overall topic, there's false equivalence that is hurled left and right, and I want everyone to become aware of the reality behind the false equivalence. So the ones in red are what I would regard, in my opinion, as false statements. And I'll explain why I consider them to be false. All religions are the same. Okay? that's a broad-based generality. Usually, when you encounter something like that, you can be pretty certain that there's going to be an incorrect assumption in there somewhere. So what I say is this: Judeo-Christian religions have certain similarities to one another. Eastern religions are really quite different. The more you dig into them, the more you realize that they are sort of like the two major branches of religions in the world. There's the Western religions, there's the Eastern religions, and they share relatively little in common. So to equate them is to engage in false equivalence. That matters in just a little bit, because people who say that all religions are the same, they're trying to say that, well, these attacks that took place, well, look at these other religions. They have also done horrible things in the name of religions, and therefore the attackers are no worse than the people in the religions that you know, whose history involve a lot of bloodshed, etc., as a way to defend, to apologize for, to excuse what has taken place. So that's the first point that I want to make. Second point, all religious books have parts that are outdated and unacceptable to modern sensibilities. This one usually passes without scrutiny, without criticism. And this is because living in the Western world as we do, most people know about the Bible. Most people know the Old Testament, the New Testament. Most people know relatively less about the Quran. But then we can look up information online about it. We can study the parts where, on the one hand, Quran will praise Christians as brethren, as being partners in a brotherhood of religions. On the other hand, in the same Quran, in the same book, there are passages that condemn Christians as infidels. So it's both. So how do you justify aggression, from the perspective of the Quran? How do you justify aggression against Christians? Well, you can find scriptural support for that. But how do you justify mercy or compassion or diplomacy or negotiation with Christians? Well, you can find support for that in the same book. And we know that situation is. We also have many different parts in the Bible. We have love thy neighbor, and then we also have Leviticus. So we have things that don't necessarily smooth out, are not necessarily consistent, and you can find support for many different things, many possible courses of action. In that self-contradictory way, there are similarities. However, the difference between Eastern and Western religion that I want to share with you, and hopefully through YouTube share with the world as well, is that in terms of teachings, you will not find in Eastern religions that thou shalt go forth and kill the infidels. It's just not there. Now there are scholars who will say, oh, that's because you're not aware of these ancient texts used by Buddhist kings in history to justify wars of aggression upon one another, to whom I say, okay, Mr. Scholar, show me that scripture. Show me what that text is. Can you quote it? And the answer is no, because it's in the vast expanse of human history, you can find pretty much anything, and then you can make a stretch and say that's part of the Buddhist teachings. You can stretch it like that, but that's really a debating trick. So most people don't really know what's actually in the text of Eastern traditions. I happen to know because I can work with, I can read and understand those books in the original Chinese, in the ancient Chinese. I don't know Sanskrit, so I can't go back that far. But just as long as we're sticking with Chinese traditions, I can say without qualification that aside from works of forgery, there are no sacred texts that advocate the killing of anyone. Now, I recognize the last point here. poor translations do not clarify the situation because it's much too difficult for most people to grasp, even the translation. So people just sort of automatically assume that I don't really know everything there is to know about Eastern books of religion, and therefore probably somewhere there's some teaching that I would find very contrary to modern ideals of preserving life. And the answer is no. In the Buddhist teachings, it is all about the preservation of life by itself. Now, here's a couple of examples of the mistranslation that will be interesting to people who want to study, especially Buddhism. These are terms in Chinese Buddhism that have been horribly mistranslated. And then there are also examples that people will raise to have that false equivalence, to say, well, look at the Japanese kamikaze pilots. Look at the Vietnamese monks who immolate themselves, who burn themselves to death. Look at the Southeast Asian monks today, in this day and age, who are going to war. And they'll use that as examples of false equivalence to say all religions are the same, because look at the violence that's been in the past of Buddhism. So all of these examples are false examples. The kamikaze pilots, many of them not actually Buddhists, but Shintoists. And whether they're Buddhists or Shintoists, they're not acting out of Buddhist or Shintoist teachings. Rather, what they're acting out of when they slam those planes into American aircraft carriers or warships, what they're doing is death before dishonor. Okay, and because Japanese culture is something that has received a lot of exposure in the West, when I say death before dishonor, most people will say, "Oh, okay, I know what that is." That's what motivated the kamikaze pilots, not because the Buddha says, "Thou shalt ram your plane into an American ship." It doesn't say that. So the motivation actually has nothing to do with religion at all. It has a lot to do with Bushido, the code of honor. The Vietnamese monks who burn themselves to death as a way to protest, you can't really equate that with suicide bombers. Suicide bombers, the intent is to kill as many other people as you possibly can when you blow yourself up. Those monks were intent on burning themselves to protest. So you can equate them. They're just not the same thing. The monks that are waging war today, yes, they're going to war, but two things. They're doing this against the Muslims in different parts of Southeast Asia. There's conflicts in Thai, there's Burma, there's Indonesia. There are conflicts, Sri Lanka, different places flare up with conflicts between Buddhism and Islam. They fight for nationalistic reasons, not for religious reasons, not because there's some sort of instruction or some sort of prophecy, some sort of apocalypse that's coming, and they have to play a role to bring about the apocalypse. So some academics do claim that they act from spectral jurisdiction, they just can't really show compelling proof. So unless that's the case, I'm not going to pay a lot of attention to the line of argument that everybody's the same, oh, they're all the same. No, they're not the same. They're really not the same. So these are just side points to talk about. I just think it's dangerous to get into false equivalence because the whole idea is to make the attacks not seem as bad. Like, of course they're doing this because think about what we have done in medieval times. I can't accept that as an excuse for this attack or any other attacks that will take place in the future. So just to wrap up our discussion, I'm gonna, when I say something like poor translations do little to clarify the situation, that people don't really know a whole lot about Eastern books on religion, Because so here I don't mean to suggest that there are translations that are so bad that they take the original that say nothing about killing and then they mistranslate it so that now it says that thou shalt kill people that don't believe the same way that you do. So that's not what I'm suggesting. What I do see all the time is that the translations that are out there make the original so unnecessarily confusing that people have a very tough time understanding, even though it's only English, it's been translated into English, people have such a tough time understanding what the original is saying that they usually can't read a whole lot of it before they have to stop and say, okay, I just don't get it. You know, this is all incredibly mysterious. And that's what I mean by it doesn't help comprehension. So there's this example that I'm using. So I have a website here. This website is in Chinese, and I'm using this website for a couple of reasons. I have a book of translations out there on the Tao Te Ching. So having studied the Tao Te Ching extensively, I know exactly what's in it, and I know how to explain it in a way that's very clear. However, I know at the same time, just by looking at reviews on the internet, on Amazon, etc., that there's any number of readers who will look at the clarity that I offer and turn away from that. And so I have people who say, well, you know, there's another translation by another author that I prefer. That author, you know, makes far more sense and is much better qualified. So I hear that about certain authors that I already know has made a ton of mistakes that people don't know about. Sometimes they'll say, well, look at this author. He spent time in Asia. He traveled through China, so he must know what he's talking about. Well, I know what the original says, and I know what this author has translated. So I know that, indeed, this author does not know what he's talking about. Having traveled through Asia does not magically confer that extra understanding to you. So I just randomly use a couple of examples. This is this particular translation that the author has done is from the Diamond Sutra. The Diamond Sutra is a religious text that is very central, very important to Buddhism. No matter what flavor of Buddhism you subscribe to, that you practice or are interested in, whether it's Tibetan Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, any kind of Buddhism, you will eventually encounter the Diamond Sutra. It's a very important book. So this particular American translator, Bill Porter, has made a translation of that as well. He writes under the name Red Pine, and it seems he likes, the way that he writes is quote-unquote scholarly, with a lot of citations. So most people not being qualified to assess the quality of the translation will automatically assume that he must be extremely knowledgeable. I look at his work and I see a ton of errors, and I'll explain just a couple. So in the Diamond Sutra, there's this expression. The first character here means 4. The number 4, that's the number 4 in Chinese. The second character, if you look it up in the dictionary, it says fruit. So he translates as 4 fruits. So there's no additional explanation. So you're not quite sure what the 4 fruits are. Are they 4 of the same fruits, like 4 apples or 4 bananas, or 4 different fruits? Maybe orange in there somewhere, etc. You know, and what does it mean? Now, I happen to know the Diamond Sutra in depth, and I know the Chinese masters who have studied it, and this is this particular website explains that part of the Diamond Sutra. Very easy for me to understand that fruit here, the Chinese character, is used in the same sense in English as when we say the fruits of your labors. When you say the fruits of your labors, you're not talking about literal fruits. You're talking about results that you have accomplished. So that is the meaning in the original. So specifically, in the original Chinese, it's 四果, and then one more character, 位, which means position. So the 4 fruit positions, the 4 fruit places, what is that? No, what it means, what it actually means is the 4 resulting states that are specific to explain the attainment of Dharmic study. Dharma is a Buddhist term for teaching. Dharmic is the teaching of the Buddha, teaching of Buddhism. When you study Buddhism, you are engaged in Dharmic study, and you can get to a point where you reach the 4 resulting states, the 4 results. And then the Diamond Sutra goes on to explain what the 4 are. But either way, there's no 4 fruits. So it's not just a bad translation, it's misleading and it's ignorant. It just shows that the translator doesn't really know what the original is saying. Another one that's close to that mistranslation, 入流. 入 means to enter, 流 means flow. So this translator, Bill Porter, has translated this as that entire passage as reaching the river. Now, that passage has nothing to do with rivers whatsoever. It's a conversation where the teacher is saying that, well, when you 入流, you really haven't entered anything. So it's translated as when you reach the river, you haven't reached the river. So that's not really helpful because people don't really understand what that is saying. And there's no explanation for that mistranslation. So it's wrong. It's just meaningless baloney. The original is actually entering the divine flow. So in a different place, it says 入圣流, where the middle character means sacred or divine. What it means is to go with the flow of divinity or the people that have reached so much wisdom that they appear to be divine. So the overall teaching is that when you enter that level of understanding, that divine level of understanding, and you're going with the flow at that level, you haven't entered anything that is physical. You haven't entered into a secret club or an association with like-minded individuals. So overall, it's a valuable teaching in the Diamond Sutra, but it's hopelessly butchered in these bad translations. But then there's any number of people who praise this particular translator as being definitive. I have to disagree with that, and I have to say that the people who are putting forth that praise, they themselves are not really qualified to assess the rightness or wrongness of the translation. But there's not a whole lot I can do about that. I know that I won't be in a position to convince anyone because people will just try to engage me in a debate, and they will use all kinds of debating tactics, counter examples. I don't really have time for that. All I can do is to continue doing what I'm doing and to present the Tao in a way that is as accurate as possible, and hoping that at some point good information will crowd out the bad information. And when people see the benefits of the good information, they'll be able to assess that for themselves. In general, the people that are into the mistranslations, I can see who they are, what they read, because their lives don't change at all. But if they do actually come into contact with the authentic teachings, for sure their lives will change for the better. Very good timing to do a meeting ending ritual for today, everybody. Please follow me. 起立，面向佛堂，持架深鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，持架高一点，全是一鞠躬，结班一鞠躬。Okay, guys, we're done for now.
Join the Tao meeting live to participate in the questions and commentary. For more information, go to http://taoism.net/tao/connect-online.